Everyone in the neighborhood laughed the first time they saw it. The rusted old car parked crookedly in my driveway, doors dented, paint peeling, tires that looked like they'd given up years ago. "What is that?" they'd whisper behind my back. "A junkyard accident?" Kids would point at it, neighbors would snicker as they drove by in their shiny SUVs. I'd watch from my kitchen window, arms crossed, stomach tight with a mix of shame and defiance. Every laugh, every stare felt like it was digging into me, as if my worth could be measured by the state of a car. And maybe to them it could. I remember the first time I tried to explain it. "It's special," I said to my neighbor, a sharp-tongued woman with too much time on her hands. She just raised an eyebrow and shook her head like I was some kind of deluded fool. I wanted to tell her it wasn't about appearances, that there was history in every scratch, a story in every dent, but her eyes said I'd already lost before I even began. And maybe I had if being misunderstood meant being invisible. People love to judge. It's easier than understanding. Every day I'd walk past my so-called junk car, tracing my fingers over the faded paint, the chipped chrome. I'd sit in the driver's seat and just breathe. There was a hum in that car that no one else could hear. It was a heartbeat, steady and constant, reminding me that what mattered most wasn't outside. It was the story underneath. That heartbeat kept me company in quiet moments, when the world felt loud and cruel, when the laughter of neighbors seemed to echo right through the walls of my house. I'd lie awake some nights, staring at the ceiling, imagining their faces if they knew, imagining their shock, but I kept it a secret, tucked away like a fragile treasure. Some secrets are heavy, almost painful to hold, but the right ones are worth it. The car was one of them. I couldn't risk it being exposed too soon. People fear what they don't understand, and maybe, just maybe, the truth would make them regret the mockery. There were nights when I felt like a ghost in my own street. The neighborhood, with its manicured lawns and perfectly aligned driveways, seemed like a stage where everyone knew their part, except me. I'd walk past their doors, heads down, trying to fade into the background, wishing I could vanish into the shadows. But even in the darkest corners of doubt, a small spark of pride lingered. I knew something they didn't, something priceless. And the thought of it made my chest swell, even when my hands trembled from holding in the truth. I wasn't just fighting against their judgment. I was fighting to keep myself from believing it. The whispers, the pointed fingers, the laughter, it all threatened to seep inside me to make me doubt my worth. But the car, with all its rust and dents, reminded me that I was stronger than their opinions. That sometimes beauty isn't obvious. That sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden behind layers of neglect and misunderstanding. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the street in shades of gold and shadow, a group of neighbors gathered near my driveway. They leaned over the hood, poking and prodding, their voices sharp with disbelief. "Why don't you just get a real car?" one of them sneered. I didn't answer. I watched them with quiet intensity, heart hammering, a secret smile tugging at the corner of my lips. Little did they know the car wasn't just a car. It was the key to a story that would leave them speechless, one that would shift every assumption they'd ever made. Sometimes I wonder why people feel the need to tear others down, to mock what they don't understand. Maybe it's fear disguised as superiority, or maybe it's simple habit. But I knew one thing: the world would get its chance to see the truth. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon enough. And when it did, I imagined the pause, the frozen shock on their faces, the sudden silence after years of laughter. The car was more than metal and rust. It was proof that patience, pride, and a quiet refusal to bow to judgment could one day rewrite the story of your life. And so I waited. Every glance, every whisper, every cruel joke only sharpened my resolve. I walked through the neighborhood, head held high, shoulders squared, pretending to be small while secretly plotting a revelation so massive it would stop them in their tracks. Some nights I'd stand beside the car, fingers brushing over the hood, and whisper to it, almost like a promise. One day they'll see, one day they'll understand, and when they do, everything will change. Why did they never see me? Not really see me, not the real me. They only saw a crooked car, a faded driveway, a loser in the middle of their perfect little street. Every laugh, every sideways glance felt like a chain tightening around my chest. And yet I walked past them each day, a quiet storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. They thought I was small, weak, invisible. They were about to learn how dangerous it is to underestimate someone who's quietly keeping score. It started the day the new neighbor moved in, a young couple with 2 perfect kids and a pristine Tesla parked in the driveway. They waved enthusiastically when I walked by, oblivious to the icy stares from the others. I nodded, a polite smile in place, all while my mind replayed the whispers and jokes that had defined me in this street for years. "Can't believe she still drives that thing," one woman had said. "It's a joke." I wanted to laugh or cry, but instead I simply walked past, every step measured, every heartbeat a drum of silent determination. Inside the house, the car gleamed, not on the outside, but in the way it held its secret. I had spent years restoring it quietly, hiding its true value, waiting for the right moment. Every bolt, every panel, every polished detail was a secret message to the world. I wasn't what they thought. I was something they could never imagine. And the car, oh, the car was just the beginning. At night, when the street lights flickered and the neighborhood fell into the hum of distant televisions and lawn sprinklers, I would sit on my porch and imagine their reactions. What would it feel like, I wondered, to hold a secret that could unravel everything they assumed about me? The thrill of it was almost unbearable. My hands would shake slightly as I traced the lines of the car, and I'd whisper into the night, "They think they know. They don't even know the half of it." There was a moment, one that still haunts me, when I overheard a group of neighbors laughing about me during a block party. They stood in a circle, drinks in hand, mocking the car, mocking me. "Why does she even live here?" one asked. "Who would want to be neighbors with that?" The word hung in the air like a dagger. I felt my chest tighten, a strange mix of anger and amusement swirling inside me. They didn't see me as a person, they saw me as a punchline. And I made a quiet promise that day. Someday they would eat those words, slowly, whole. But the thing about patience is that it teaches you more than revenge. It teaches you timing, strategy, and the power of silence. I knew if I revealed the truth too soon, it would be dismissed. They'd say, "No way," or laugh it off as another one of my delusions. So I waited. And in waiting, I began to understand the nuances of the neighborhood, the unspoken hierarchy, the petty rivalries, the fragile egos carefully wrapped in designer labels and immaculate lawns. Every secret they had, every pretension, every small act of cruelty, it all became part of my map. And soon, that map would belong to me. I started small, testing their assumptions. A knowing glance, a subtle smile when they sneered at my driveway, a polite nod that hinted I understood more than I let on. Little cracks began to form in their facade, though they didn't notice it. They were so sure of their superiority that they couldn't imagine anyone hiding anything of real value, least of all me, the junk car lady. And that ignorance, that blissful underestimation, it would be my greatest weapon. Nights were the hardest, though. Lying awake, the moon casting pale light across the driveway, I felt the weight of their judgment pressing down. There were moments I questioned myself. Was I foolish to hold on to this? Was I letting pride turn into obsession? And yet every doubt was met with a quiet truth. The car, the secret, the plan, it wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about reclaiming dignity. It was about showing myself, above all else, that my value was never dictated by their laughter. And so I honed my patience. Every conversation, every neighborhood meeting, every casual wave became a silent chess move. I listened more than I spoke. I observed more than I acted. I smiled when they assumed I was small. I laughed inside when they thought they were winning. Each day, the anticipation grew, knotting itself in my chest. Something monumental was coming. Something that would make them see, truly see, what they had been blind to all along. Little did they know the car was only the tip of the iceberg. Beneath its rusty exterior was a treasure they could never have imagined, something worth millions, something that would shake their sense of control over their little street. And when that day came, I imagined their faces, frozen in disbelief, mouths agape, the smugness draining from their expressions as they realized just how wrong they had been. That day was coming, and I would be ready. Why do people feel so comfortable mocking what they don't understand? That question haunted me every time I stepped outside, every time I passed the row of manicured lawns and shiny SUVs. That street was a stage, and everyone else knew their lines. They had practiced superiority, perfected judgment, and polished their assumptions to a blinding sheen. And there I was, the silent outsider, the junk car woman they loved to laugh at. But beneath that rusted metal, beneath the layers of peeling paint and grime, was something they could never imagine. I remember the morning I realized the car's true power. I'd been tinkering with it for hours, carefully polishing edges, checking the engine, appreciating its finer details in silence. My hands were greasy, my shirt stained, but my heart was racing. This wasn't just a car. It was a a key to a truth so enormous, so impossible that the entire street would have to pause, take a breath, and reconsider everything they thought they knew about me. I imagined their faces, the disbelief, the sudden silence that follows when reality slaps you across the face. And for the first time in years, I smiled without restraint. But the tension was almost unbearable. Every interaction became a minefield. When neighbors waved, I waved back, small and polite on the outside, roaring with anticipation inside. When someone sneered, I nodded, pretending they had no power over me, all the while knowing that power was quietly shifting. I kept my secret like a fragile flame, careful not to let their ignorance snuff it out too soon. If I revealed it too early, it would lose its impact. Timing, I realized, was everything. One afternoon, a group of them gathered near the driveway, circling the car like predators inspecting prey. "Still drives that thing?" one scoffed. "I don't get it, why not upgrade?" I said nothing, standing off to the side, silent and calm, letting their questions hang in the air. I could almost feel their disbelief pressing against the metal of the car. They didn't know what they were looking at, didn't know they were staring at something worth more than any of their perfectly manicured homes, more than every luxury car on the street combined. Every night I would sit on my porch, the street quiet except for the occasional hum of a passing car or the distant bark of a dog. I'd trace the lines of the car, thinking about the years I'd spent hiding it, about the whispers and jokes that had become soundtrack to my life. And I'd wonder, when the truth comes out, what will it feel like? Will they cry? Will they laugh nervously, trying to cover their shock? Or will they simply stop, frozen in disbelief, as the world I'd quietly built in plain sight finally reveals itself? I began to notice the subtler things, the way the neighbors compared notes, the way they measured each other against their own fragile sense of superiority. Every conversation I overheard, every sideways glance became a piece of the puzzle. I mapped their egos, traced the invisible lines of who mattered more and who was the quietest force. And in those maps, the car was my signal, my silent weapon. Every time someone poked fun, I felt a little thrill, knowing that the joke was mine to control. The punchline had yet to arrive. And then came the day the first crack appeared. A neighbor, the self-proclaimed queen of the street, leaned against her shiny SUV, glancing at my driveway with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "You really think anyone believes that car is worth anything?" she asked loudly, ensuring everyone could hear. I didn't answer. I let her words hang in the air, let the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. She thought she'd won a small victory, but she had no idea she was stepping onto the edge of something far larger than her imagination. Inside, my heart raced. The car wasn't just a car, it wasn't just a secret, it was proof. Proof that assumptions are dangerous, proof that people can hide strength behind quiet persistence, proof that what you see on the surface rarely tells the whole story. And soon, very soon, they would all see. They would see not just the car, but the power it represented, the control it implied, and the fact that the person they'd mocked for years was holding the ultimate leverage over them. Some nights I allowed myself a private laugh, the kind that bubbles up from the pit of your stomach, deep and knowing, the kind that comes from years of enduring judgment, of keeping faith in what others can't see. I'd imagine their expressions, wide-eyed shock, nervous shifting, the subtle tremor in their voices as reality sank in, and for the first time in years I didn't feel small, I didn't feel invisible, I felt inevitable. They were blind to it now, but that blindness, I realized, was part of the story. It made the eventual revelation more powerful, more satisfying, more complete. The street had been mine all along, not because they knew it, not because I shouted it, but because I had waited. I had observed. I had mastered patience, and in that quiet mastery I had become untouchable, even if they had no idea yet. And so I waited, breathing deeply as the sun set behind the rows of perfect houses, every rusted edge of the car gleaming faintly in the fading light. I whispered to it, almost like a confidant. "Soon, they'll see, they'll understand, and when they do, nothing will ever be the same again." Have you ever felt the quiet thrill of knowing something no one else does? That kind of thrill that hums beneath your skin, makes your pulse quicken, and yet forces you to stay perfectly still in the world's eyes. That was me every single day. I walked past the neighbors, past the manicured lawns, past their smirks and whispered jokes, carrying a secret that could crumble everything they thought they knew. And I reveled in it quietly, savoring the tension like a slow-burning fire. It started with a visitor, an appraiser, someone they would have dismissed immediately if they knew I had called him. He arrived mid-morning, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp and calculating, unaware of the spectacle just across the street. I greeted him with a calm smile, ushering him toward the car. The neighbors watched from their windows, curiosity piqued, tongues wagging. "What's she up to now?" one whispered. I said nothing. I only let the moment stretch, let the suspense linger. Inside, the appraiser's hands moved over the car with reverence, as though it were a rare artifact rather than a pile of rusted metal. He tapped here, adjusted there, muttering quietly to himself. And as I watched, a strange smile crept across his face. He stepped back, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. "You realize," he said slowly, as if the words were difficult to form, "this car is worth over $2 million. $2 million? The words echoed inside me like thunder. I had waited years for this, prepared myself for this exact moment. I could almost hear the gasps from the street, though the neighbors had no idea what was happening. They were watching, leaning against fences, peeking through blinds, completely unaware that the junk car they mocked daily had just been declared one of the most valuable pieces of automotive history in existence. Their disbelief would be explosive when the truth finally reached them. I took my time revealing the news. Not through words, but through presence, through subtle hints letting them stew in the tension. A raised eyebrow here, a slow smile there. I could practically feel their assumptions crumbling. The woman who had sneered at me all those years ago, the self-proclaimed queen of the street, was packing on her lawn, eyes darting toward the driveway as if she could see the value through sheer force of will. She couldn't. None of them could. And that, I realized, was part of the beauty. The revelation wouldn't just surprise them, it would humble them. But there was more. The car was the first layer, the spark that would ignite the full storm. What they didn't know, what no one on the street suspected, was that I owned not just the car, but the land beneath it. The very street they walked on, the roads they drove, the lawns they admired. Every inch of their little paradise had been quietly, legally, irrevocably mine for years. The irony was intoxicating. They had spent so much energy judging me, mocking me, measuring themselves against what they thought was nothing. And all the while, they were standing on my ground. Literally. I watched their subtle movements, their murmurs, the way they shifted from foot to foot. The tension was almost a tangible thing, a living creature that buzzed in the air. I felt a strange mixture of pity and triumph. Pity for their arrogance, their blind assumptions, and triumph for my patience, my quiet endurance, my ability to play the long game. Every laugh they had thrown at me, every whispered insult, every moment they assumed they were superior, it had all led to this. That night I walked through the street under the dim glow of the streetlights, the car gleaming faintly in the driveway. I imagined their thoughts, confusion, disbelief, maybe even fear. The street they had claimed as theirs, the cars they had polished for appearances, the lawns they had mowed with meticulous care, it all suddenly existed in a new context. And in that context, I was the one holding the power. I, the woman they had mocked for years, the junk car lady, was untouchable. The lesson wasn't just about money or ownership. It was about perception, patience, and quiet strength. People are quick to judge, slow to see, and rarely expect the invisible to strike back. I had learned to embrace what they overlooked, to nurture what they dismissed, and to wait. The car was worth millions, yes, but the patience, the resilience, the knowledge that I could endure ridicule and emerge victorious, that was priceless. And as I stood there watching the faint flicker of lights in their windows, imagining their eventual shock, I realized that this was only the beginning. The car was the harbinger of a larger truth, a revelation that would shake the neighborhood to its core. And when that moment arrived, the silence, the awe, the quiet humility, it would be mine to witness. I had waited years for it, and finally it was almost time. Why does it take so long for people to see what's right in front of them? That question hit me every time I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel outside, every time I saw shadows lingering near the driveway. They had been so sure, so arrogant, so confident in their judgment. And yet that confidence was about to crumble like fragile glass under pressure. It began with a knock at the door. I knew who it was before I even opened it, the queen bee of the street, the one who had sneered and whispered for years. She stood there, smile tight, eyes flickering with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. I just had to ask, she stammered, voice wavering. What's the deal with that car? I let a small pause hang between us, savoring the moment, letting the silence stretch like a drawn bowstring. The tension was palpable, almost suffocating. Every neighbor within earshot seemed to lean closer to their windows, holding their breath, waiting for the next move. I invited her in. Calm, polite, patient, every step deliberate, she followed hesitantly, unsure of what she might find. The car gleamed in the sunlight streaming through the driveway, every detail meticulously restored, every surface polished to perfection. I could see her jaw tighten, the flicker of recognition in her eyes as she realized this wasn't just a car, it was something extraordinary, something priceless. Her polite curiosity was cracking, revealing the panic she tried to hide. Is it really worth that much?" she whispered, gesturing toward the car. 2 million. Those words floated between us, heavy and undeniable. I nodded slightly, letting the truth settle in. The silence that followed was thick, almost tangible, like a storm cloud ready to break. She glanced around nervously, as if checking for witnesses, and I realized something. This wasn't just about a car. It was about their entire worldview being shattered. Their arrogance, their assumptions, their sense of control, they were all unraveling in real time. And then I dropped the second layer of the revelation. I didn't shout it, I didn't boast. I simply mentioned, quietly, casually, almost as if it were a trivial detail, that the street, the homes, the sidewalks, they were mine, all of it. The very ground they had walked on, the lawns they had admired, the roads they had driven on every day, they existed under my ownership. For years. The realization hit them like a cold wave. I watched their faces transform from curiosity to shock to horror. They tried to process it, stumbling over words, grasping for excuses, grasping for anything that might save their pride. "But how?" one of them finally managed. "We've lived here for years, we've paid taxes, surely." I shook my head gently, letting the weight of patience, foresight, and strategy speak louder than any explanation I could offer. I didn't have to argue. They were silent, and the silence said more than words ever could. For years they had mocked me, laughed at me, whispered behind my back. Every insult, every joke, every sideways glance had been recorded in the quiet corners of my mind, each one fueling a fire that would finally consume their assumptions. And now the fire had been lit. I could see it in their eyes, the dawning recognition that they had misjudged everything, underestimated everything, and miscalculated everything about the person they thought they knew. Some of them froze. Some stepped back, hesitant to approach too closely. Others fumbled with their words, attempting to regain some semblance of dignity, but dignity had already slipped through their fingers like water. The power dynamic had shifted entirely, silently, irrevocably. I had been underestimated for years, but in this single, perfect moment the balance of authority had changed. They were no longer in control. I was, quietly, invisibly, undeniably. And yet, even in the triumph, there was a quiet moral undercurrent. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliating them for my own satisfaction. It was about patience. It was about endurance. It was about showing the world and myself that judgment, arrogance, and superficiality are never reliable measures of value. True worth often hides in plain sight, beneath layers of neglect, beneath ridicule, beneath assumptions. I could see it in their expressions, the sudden awareness, the pause, the undeniable truth settling into their consciousness. And in that pause I felt a strange mix of pity and pride. Pity for their blindness and pride for my quiet perseverance. Every day of mockery, every whisper, every sideways glance, it had led to this moment. I didn't gloat. I simply stood there, calm and steady, letting the revelation speak for itself. And as I watched them slowly retreat, murmuring and shaking their heads, I realized something profound. Patience doesn't just reward, you become untouchable. The world underestimates those who endure quietly, who build in secret, who wait. And when the revelation comes, it doesn't just surprise people. It transforms the way they see everything forever. Have you ever watched someone finally realize they've been wrong their entire lives? Not in small ways, not in trivial mistakes, but in a way that shakes the very foundation of everything they thought they knew? That was the scene playing out on my street, right before my eyes. I stood quietly by the car, letting the moment unfold, savoring every flicker of disbelief, every falter of arrogance. They had assumed, they had judged, and now they were confronting the truth. The first neighbor to speak was the man who had always smirked the loudest, the one who prided himself on his superior taste and knowledge. His voice trembled as though he was unaccustomed to humility. "So, all this time it's yours?" he asked, gesturing to the street, the lawns, the driveway. I nodded, slow and deliberate, letting the weight of the confirmation sink in. He blinked repeatedly, as if trying to reconcile the version of reality he'd lived with for years with this new, shocking truth. It wasn't just him. One by one, other neighbors emerged from behind hedges, peeking cautiously around corners, murmuring amongst themselves. Faces went pale, mouths fell open. Hands gripped fences or leaned against cars for support. The shock wasn't just about the car, it was the realization that their whole sense of ownership, their carefully maintained hierarchy of power, was built on a fragile assumption, one that I had quietly dismantled while they laughed at me. I could see it in the queen bee's eyes, the woman who had mocked me most. For years, she had cultivated control through judgment, through fear, through subtle dominance. And now she was exposed, not with anger or force, but with the undeniable truth. I had waited, I had watched, I had endured, and in this moment she understood that all her carefully constructed superiority had been an illusion. I didn't gloat, I didn't need to. Her silence, the way her hands trembled slightly at her sides, was more powerful than any words I could speak. They began to ask questions, hesitant, almost afraid. How did you do this? Why didn't anyone know? We've lived here for years. Each question was like a thread unraveling the tapestry of their arrogance, and with every answer I gave, calm, measured, patient, their disbelief deepened. They had spent so long measuring me by appearances, by assumptions, by laughter, and now those measures were meaningless. I had become a living testament to the danger of underestimating someone who keeps their strength hidden. But the scene wasn't just about humiliation or surprise. It was about realization, about the quiet power of patience, about the importance of perseverance in the face of judgment. I watched as neighbors processed the layers of truth, the car, the ownership, the years of meticulous planning and endurance. Some shook their heads in awe. Some muttered apologies, small and awkward, as if words could repair the humiliation they had inflicted. But no words could erase the lesson they had just learned. The air was thick with tension, but also with a strange sense of respect. I could feel it shifting, like an invisible current running through the street. The laughter that had followed me for years had vanished. The whispers had stopped. All that remained was a quiet acknowledgement. The person they thought was beneath them was, in fact, the one who had quietly orchestrated the most powerful revelation they had ever witnessed. And in that moment, I reflected on the truth I had carried all along. Dignity isn't loud. Strength doesn't always announce itself. Patience and perseverance often hide behind ordinary appearances, waiting for the moment when the world can no longer ignore them. They had mocked me, but that mockery had become my shield, my teacher, my quiet fuel. Every insult, every sideways glance, every whispered joke had led to this. I wasn't just proving them wrong. I was embodying the lesson they had refused to learn for years. By the time the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the street, the transformation was complete. The neighbors were no longer laughing. They were listening, learning, acknowledging a power they had overlooked. And I stood there calm, composed, the faintest smile playing on my lips. The car glimmered in the fading light, more than metal and paint. It was the symbol of endurance, of unseen value, of triumph through patience. And as the first stars began to appear in the sky, I realized something profound. Victory isn't always about confrontation. Sometimes it's about quietly proving a truth that changes the world around you, without raising your voice, without seeking revenge. The street was mine. Not just through ownership, but through the patience, resilience, and unwavering belief that what truly matters cannot be judged by appearances. Have you ever seen the moment a community's reality fractures? It's subtle at first, hesitant glances, murmured conversations, the awkward clearing of throats, but soon it becomes undeniable. That moment had arrived on my street. The revelation about the car, about the land, about the quiet strength that had always been mine. It was settling into their bones. And the effect was electric, almost tangible, a pulse running through every yard, every fence, every polished SUV. It began with whispers, not loud, not pointed, but soft, cautious murmurs that carried across lawns. "Did you hear?" one neighbor asked another, voice tight with disbelief. She owns the street?" Eyes widened, jaws tightened, heads shook as if shaking could make the truth disappear. But the truth didn't disappear. It hovered, unstoppable, undeniable, seeping into every corner of the neighborhood like an unstoppable tide. I watched from the porch, calm, almost meditative, letting the storm unfold. I didn't have to speak. I didn't have to act. Every sideways glance, every nervous shuffle, every half-formed apology from the neighbors fed into the narrative I had built over years. They were realizing, slowly but inevitably, that the woman they had mocked for decades, the junk car lady, the quiet outsider, was the one holding all the cards. Every insult they had thrown now hung awkwardly in the air, meaningless and impotent. The queen bee of the street tried to reclaim control. Her words, sharp and forced, cut through the quiet like jagged glass. "Well, I suppose we didn't know," she said, attempting to regain authority, attempting to reestablish the hierarchy she had spent years cultivating. But it was too late. Her control had evaporated. The neighbors could sense it. Even she could sense it. The very foundations of her perceived superiority had crumbled, and there was no glue strong enough to hold them together again. Some neighbors approached, hesitant, seeking answers, looking for a way to reconcile years of assumptions with this new reality. I don't understand," one stammered. How did we not see?" I smiled softly, quietly, letting the answer settle between us. "You judged too quickly," I said. "You assumed, you measured my worth by appearances, not by substance, and now you see the result." The words were gentle, almost reflective, but they carried the weight of years of endurance, of silent observation, of meticulous patience. And then in the midst of the tension, I noticed a shift. Some of them were quietly nodding, absorbing the lesson, understanding for the first time that life isn't about the surface. That wealth, value, and power are often hidden in plain sight. That patience, resilience, and quiet confidence can achieve what arrogance and mockery never could. It was subtle, this acknowledgement, a pause, a soft intake of breath, but it was profound. The dynamics of the street had changed, permanently. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel the weight of victory. Not loud, not brash, but deep, steady, and enduring. The car gleamed in the evening sun like a symbol, more than just metal and paint. It was proof. Proof that ridicule and judgment cannot define your worth. Proof that patience and careful planning can overturn assumptions. Proof that quiet strength, when cultivated and preserved, is more powerful than any superficial superiority. Some neighbors lingered, their movements tentative, eyes tracing the driveway, the car, the land itself, as though trying to understand how their world had been so completely rewritten without their awareness. A few attempted awkward compliments, but they were hollow, tinged with disbelief and awe. Some left quietly, glancing over their shoulders as if fearing they might break the spell with their own presence. And I didn't stop them. I let them absorb it in their own way, letting the revelation ripple, slow and unstoppable, through the street. And as darkness fell, washing the neighborhood in quiet shadows, I stood there, a silent observer of the transformation. The street was still, save for the occasional murmur of conversation or the soft creak of a gate. I realized then that victory isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, slow, inevitable. It's the subtle shift in perception, the quiet of respect, the acknowledgement that what is truly valuable cannot always be measured at first glance. In that moment, I felt something rare, a mixture of triumph and mercy. Triumph for enduring ridicule and proving the world wrong. Mercy for those who had judged, who had mocked, who had underestimated me, because the lesson they were learning now, though uncomfortable, was necessary. Sometimes the most profound power comes not from confrontation, but from quiet revelation. And the street, my street, had finally learned it. Have you ever felt the quiet satisfaction of watching a truth finally settle into the world? That slow, undeniable shift where assumptions crumble, silence fills the spaces once occupied by mockery, and the air itself seems charged with a new understanding. That's what I felt as the street finally caught its collective breath. Years of judgment, whispers, and sideways glances were fading, replaced by a recognition that what they had dismissed as nothing had always been everything. The neighbors moved differently after that. Some avoided my driveway, unsure how to act now that the rules had changed. Others lingered, hesitant, peering over fences or walking slowly past, muttering questions to themselves. She owns it all? And the car, really? I never imagined. The words, hesitant and fragmented, were the soundtrack of a community grappling with reality. Their laughter had disappeared. Their smirks had vanished. In their place was awe, and beneath it the subtle stirrings of respect. I walked through the neighborhood that evening, under the soft glow of the streetlights, feeling the shift as I passed each house. The streets I had once been mocked on now hummed with a different energy. It was quiet, almost reverent. I could sense it in the way doors closed gently, in the way voices softened behind windows, in the way even the children seemed to regard me with something akin to wonder. I had become more than a neighbor. I had become a force of inevitability, a testament to patience, endurance, and quiet strategy. There were a few who tried to approach, carefully testing the waters, asking questions, seeking approval or guidance. We never realized," one said, voice barely above a whisper. "We should have seen." I smiled, not harshly, not triumphantly, but with the calm satisfaction of someone who has endured and quietly prevailed. "It's not about realizing," I said. "It's about understanding. Judgments are easy. Patience and persistence, that's the hard part." They nodded, absorbing the lesson, tasting it slowly like a bitter wine that grows as it settles. The car gleamed under the moonlight now, every reflection a reminder of the secret I had carried, nurtured, and protected for years. It had become a symbol, not of wealth, not of power alone, but of endurance and foresight. They had mocked it. They had mocked me. And yet here it was, unshaken, undeniable, revealing more than metal and paint ever could. It revealed what happens when you refuse to be defined by others' assumptions. I paused at the edge of the driveway, looking down the street. Each house held a story, each yard a reminder of the life that continued even as they adjusted to this new reality. I thought about the years of whispers, the sideways glances, the sneers that had once cut so sharply. And I realized something. Their mockery hadn't weakened me. It had prepared me. Every insult, every judgment had been fuel for the revelation, building the moment to its full, cinematic impact. And now, as the street breathed differently, I could finally exhale. Some neighbors tried to smile, awkwardly, uncertainly, offering small gestures of reconciliation. Some avoided me altogether, still hesitant, still processing. And I let them navigate their own reactions. That was part of the lesson too. Power, true power, doesn't demand recognition. It exists quietly, patiently, and those who witness it can either learn from it or continue to stumble in their blindness. The final truth, the quiet moral of the story, settled gently in the air. Strength isn't always loud. Value isn't always visible. Patience, perseverance, and careful planning often outweigh arrogance, haste, and judgment. People can mock you, underestimate you, and dismiss you. But if you remain steadfast, if you nurture what truly matters quietly, your moment will arrive. And when it does, the world will pause, and your triumph will be undeniable. As I turned back to the car, resting in the driveway I had called mine for so long, I felt a profound sense of completion. The laughter had gone. The judgments had dissipated. The street, once a theater of ridicule, had transformed into a silent acknowledgement of what was always true. I was more than they could see, and the world had finally caught up. I whispered softly to the car, almost as if it had been my confidant through all the years of ridicule and patience. "We made it. They see now. They understand, finally." And in that quiet night, under the faint glow of streetlights and stars, I realized the ultimate victory wasn't just in proving them wrong. It was in enduring, in believing in what others couldn't see, and in showing the world, and myself, that true worth can never be measured by appearances alone. The street was mine. The car was priceless. And for the first time in years, I felt truly, undeniably free.